everyone, and welcome to episode 95 of the Retrospectives podcast, Megaman X. My name is Patrick Arthur, and I'm joined, as always, by my co-host, James Turlings. James, we return to the Mega Man series, one that we bizarrely started with Battle Network, but now it seems like we're mostly working through the series in chronological order, right?
Well, if you consider skipping every single game in the sub-series to get to your next one, sure.
Yeah, this is a bit of an interesting thing. I actually didn't realize this at the time, but the Mega Man series, the original one, because we played Mega Man 2 back for episode 65, I assumed that Mega Man X was just the next series, like the next iteration of Mega Man, but it turns out that the original Mega Man series was continuing in parallel with Mega Man X, making X a sub-series that was kind of running alongside it. And I think that as our discussion will show, it's a game that, despite looking superficially similar to the original Mega Man series, comes in with a very different design philosophy and goal for the player experience.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, this is going to be, I think, a point of contention in the episode, because actually we had differing opinions when we did Mega Man 2, right?
Mm-hmm.
I distinctly remember being quite down on the game, particularly near the end. I thought it fell off a cliff in terms of my enjoyment of it. I really liked the non-linear structure and going through the acts, but man, once you get to Wily's Castle, it felt like a bit of a slog. And then you had some excellent design with stuff like the Boo Beam Trap and the dragon.
I fucking hate that dragon, man. And I see people in speedruns dealing with it with, the boomerang and spamming it. I didn't know about that shit, so I had to fight it properly, and it was not a good time. I think the other big point of difference for us, James, was that I over time kind of really loved the hardcore difficulty aspect of that game. At first, it deeply pissed me off with a lot of the attack patterns of enemies, but I grew to enjoy learning how to evade their attacks, whereas you kind of skipped a lot of that bullshit by using save states, which I think we agreed ended up being the wrong move, but I do agree that some of it is bullshit in that older game.
Yeah, I distinctly remember grinding health on enemies for quite some time. Every time I lost health, it was pretty tedious, I gotta say. And I think some of the bosses' attack patterns weren't as polished as they could have been. There was a couple of, especially I think Airman's attacks, it felt like they weren't quite built around your moveset. It felt like a couple of the exact patterns were a bit hard to dodge.
For me, it was the speedy guy with the boomerang. I fucking hated that fight. I just face tanked the hits until he died with the weapon he was weak to, and I had an awful time.
Music was excellent though. Mega Man 2, rockin' soundtrack.
Yeah, something that Mega Man X continues in most ways. But yeah, we'll talk about that in a second. Firstly, for those who've never listened to us before, James and I make up the Retrospectives podcast. What we do each and every fortnight is that we play through classic games of the past with the intention of reviewing them from a modern perspective. So this is not a nostalgia podcast. We're not here to understand and appreciate these games in the context in which they're released. We have just played these games, and we want to tell you about our experiences playing them today and how good they feel and how they compare to modern games, particularly since there's so many spiritual sequels coming out to these games nowadays. How do these original classics that are widely beloved actually stand up? So relax, sit down, because we'll be going into tremendous detail into what works about Mega Man X and what doesn't. So, James, we both played on an emulator, SNES 9X, and we both had no issues. It just works flawlessly, and that's one of the advantages of emulating the Super Nintendo games. Even PS2 emulation, you can have some issues with, but for Super Nintendo, no issues whatsoever. I guess we'll just say that we recommend you listen to our episode of Mega Man 2 first. We will be drawing a lot of comparisons. I wouldn't say it's required listening, but it will add some helpful context for our conversation. So I recommend you download that one and listen to that one first. This is kind of a sequel episode, even if it's not a true one. So there's a lot of value in listening to that first. Basic setup of Mega Man X. So, as we said, it's a sub-series of the broader Mega Man games, first released in 1993 for the Super Nintendo, and this is the first Mega Man game for the Super Nintendo. It's set in the future of the original games, and you play as the titular X, or Mega Man X, a robot who's been given free will and chooses to fight the evil robots known as Mavericks, which are led by someone called Sigma. When you start the game, however, you're lacking power and upgrades. There's this nifty intro sequence where you fight a fight you cannot possibly win, and Zero, who's another Mega Man-like robot, comes and saves you and says, "Listen, mate, I know that you want to do what you can to take on Sigma, but you need to get powered up before you do it." So, as a result, you decide to take on 8 of Sigma's underlings, who are helpfully spread out in 8 stages. And this is where the game is very similar to Mega Man 2, and I'm assuming most of the other games in the Mega Man series. We've obviously skipped a lot to get to this Super Nintendo iteration. The game's broken up into 8 stages. They're quite short stages, probably about 5 minutes long for your average gamer, but it could, take longer or shorter depending on whether you're speedrunning it or enjoying the scenery and hunting for secrets. At the end of each of those stages is a boss, and when you defeat that boss, you get their weapon. So as you play, your arsenal grows. Once you have completed those 8 stages, you enter the end game, which is a multi-stage castle-like thing where you have to fight against some sub-bosses and then finally take on Sigma himself. Just so everyone's on the same page, Mega Man X, like Mega Man 2 before, is a 2D action platformer. So you're moving around the screen, jumping on platforms and killing enemies. This is a shooting 2D action platformer. So like the original and like, say, Super Metroid, you have guns and you have a lot of ranged weapons. And the enemies also have a lot of ranged weapons and you have to dodge bullets. So you move through each stage, you kill the enemies, you jump over the traps, you fight the boss at the end, you get a weapon to power up, and then you do it over and over again until you take on the final gauntlet of challenges. James, anything to add to that? Do you think that summarizes this game decently well?
Yeah, it does a pretty good job. Mega Man X, along with those aforementioned features, also adds in a few of its own little quirks to the formula. Such as the slide and the wall jump, which ends up making it feel a lot more actiony and, I guess, fluid and mobile compared to the original Mega Man series. Other than that, there are more secrets hidden about the place, I think. You are more rewarded for exploring each stage. There are heart tanks, I think one in each level, that gives you extra maximum health. And throughout a number of the stages, there are some very powerful upgrades that you can find, the most notable of which being a piece of armor that effectively doubles your health, as it makes you take half damage from all attacks. There's about 4 of these littered throughout the 8 stages, so, there is a bit of more of an emphasis on exploration here, although not that much, and most of it is facilitated by these new, platforming abilities that you have.
Yeah, the levels are still linear, it's just there's some more detailed secrets. Mega Man 2 had some secrets, but they were more things you could access once you'd gotten those item power-ups, the ones that created different floating platforms. Or you would go, there'd be 3 alternate paths, and one of them would have the upgrade and the other 2 wouldn't, but you wouldn't know until it was too late because you were falling down the wrong path. This has genuine hidden secrets that you can easily miss if you're not really trying to push the boundaries of what's in the stage. So with that, James, I think we should just jump right into the discussion. Is there something in particular you'd like to talk about with this game?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that struck out to me was just, I know we've skipped a lot of the games in the series, going from 2 to this game, but man, the jump in visual quality and just gameplay polish is just outstanding compared to the second game. I felt like every single enemy in this game was properly designed around the player character and what abilities they had access to. Things like, in the very first, the level at the top left, which I picked first, Launch Octopus's world, you start off in this kind of beach area with maybe waist-high water, and there are these little, skeeter robots that skim the surface of the water, and the water level is, exactly at the level where your arm sticks out to shoot its bullet, right? Things have very precise height and timing and attack patterns that very, it feels like they've been playtested a lot to make them fit with what the player can do. I felt like a lot of times in Mega Man 2, there was, little weird sections where I felt like they probably could have playtested this more, like I said, Airman's attack patterns or something like that didn't quite feel, like they were spot on. Whereas in this game, I feel like there's an insane level of polish on basically everything.
I really like that phrase you used, designed around the player, because I completely agree with you. It's very difficult for me to articulate why games like Mega Man 2 and Castlevania don't feel great to me to play, but it's probably exactly that. It feels like the enemies and their attacks aren't designed around the player and their limited axis of movement in those older games. And that's not to say that you can't dodge everything with perfect and precise movement in those games. I mean, I've seen a video of someone beating death with just the basic whip. Like, it's clearly possible if you're skilled enough. But I think for your average gamer, and certainly for me, a lot of the time it felt like I had to almost trade damage or kind of stumble through attacks in order to get through those stages effectively. In this game, every single time you take damage, it is your fault. You have 100% ownership over your mistakes because it always feels like you're capable of dodging and maneuvering and approaching the situation differently.
There was a marked reduction in how often I felt like something was completely bullshit, to be honest. Like, I can't really think of too many examples, at all in Mega Man X, whereas, like, there is so many examples I can point to for Mega Man 2 in this regard. So overall, it just feels more fair, more designed around the player, and I really enjoyed that. It's not always immediately obvious that this is the case. For example, one of the bosses, he has this an attack where he shoots, 3 bullets at you, and the bullets are just low enough for you to not be able to walk under them. And it took me, a couple of attempts at this boss until I realized, like, if I use the dash, when Mega Man is like, dashing forward and he's kind of diagonal as he's, the animation, he's just low enough to dodge those bullets if he's dashing.
Ah, that's cool. I didn't even realize that. I was just wall jumping a lot.
Yeah. There's so many instances where there's stuff like that where you can, like, learn a little extra thing about the boss. Just before we started recording again, I got finished playing through the game, well, at least the main stages, not the castle, again, and I noticed a heap of stuff regarding all of these, like, niche interactions with the weapons that I hadn't noticed on my first time around, and that just kind of, like, reinforced the idea to me that they went over this many, many times to try and make sure that everything, like, worked cohesively together. I think they did a really good job here.
So I want to step back from the bosses for a moment because I have a markedly difference of opinion between how this game plays in the stages and how it plays in the boss fights. I agree with everything you said. I think that it has been carefully designed around the player in the sense that nothing feels unfair. But I do think there is a problem here. If it is a problem for some people, it ended up being a bit of a problem for me, which is that getting through these stages is too easy. This game is much, much easier than Mega Man 2, at least in the regular stages. I got through, I think, almost every stage without even dying, and I did get the armor upgrade fairly early, which may have helped in that regard. But there were very few spots which I would say were truly challenging from a platforming perspective or engaging with enemies, at least in those first 8 stages. And I think that as a result, while it can still be fun to use your character, it doesn't feel like they pushed the limits of what your character's expanded moveset and arsenal was capable of in designing it a challenge that would truly force you to use your entire arsenal. In a lot of ways, it's more like Super Mario World, where it feels more like a fun playground where you get to choose what weapon you like, what weapon is more fun. You're dashing and wall sliding and leaping all over the place, and the poor enemies in those stages cannot keep up with your power level.
Yeah, and I agree with what you're saying. There's been a massive difference in design philosophy here, I think. Whereas something that Mega Man 2 did was the classic, they'd introduce a stage gimmick, for example, some moving platforms, and then you would do a number of different screens in a row that would have successfully more difficult versions of that gimmick. Mega Man 2, and we saw that in Celeste as well, and we've seen that in platformers and other games before where, they introduce a mechanic and then they push it further and further and further and further. This game does not do that, and I was also going to draw the comparison with Super Mario World, where they don't linger on the same thing for very long at all. You're lucky if you see the same thing twice ever in the game, and they are very limited in how long they stay on the screen. It feels like you're constantly seeing something new, right? Like, if you go into Armadillo's stage, the very first thing you do is you jump onto this, like, moving platform that's attached to like a minecart track, and it zooms very quickly through the stage, instantly killing like a dozen enemies, and then you're flung off and you fall down this hole and you have to run away from this huge dozer machine, and then you get away from that, and then you're just going through and jumping and shooting through some platforms, and it just keeps going and going, and you see different things, and they bring back the moving platform a couple of times, but it really doesn't feel like they're pushing the mechanic in any meaningful way. It just feels like they're trying to throw so much stuff at you in such a fast pace that you're not really going to get bored.
Well, that was the other thing I was going to specifically bring up. It's that this game, I mean, I was going to say this game's barely a platformer, but that's being too harsh. I would say that this game has de-emphasized platforming. Because the original one was like, okay, you're on a conveyor belt and it's moving backwards and enemies are spawning. And if you get pushed too far back by this conveyor belt, those enemies are going to respawn. So you're kind of fighting on this conveyor belt as it's pushing you back, trying to not die to the enemies and also trying not to get pushed back at the same time. There's nothing in the game that even approaches that kind of difficult juggling of perspective and not getting hit by difficult attacks. There just isn't. At least, and once again, I just want to say that this is just for the regular stages. The bosses are a different bit. There is one climb up the tower before you meet Zero or just afterwards that I found very challenging. But apart from that, I just don't think the game is really on that difficulty for the regular stages. And that's kind of a bummer to me, particularly because, so that slide dash, James?
Yep.
I fucking love this thing.
Me too.
This thing's incredible. In some ways, it's so much better than a dash because unlike your dash in Hollow Knight or Celeste or 1,000 games to come afterwards, it is completely cancelable. So you're not committing to like a specific dash. You can slide along the ground for as long as you choose. And then this slide conserves your momentum. So at any point you not only can exit the dash, you can exit the dash with a jump and you can conserve that momentum and go in that direction. It is wonderful. The game doesn't really make full use of the capabilities of this slide dash, despite it theoretically expanding the platforming possibilities significally, right? Like, that's just not what the game is about. It's not about...
I disagree,
Okay,
actually.
go on.
I think they use there are a bunch of things that are specifically designed around the dash and the jump. There are a heap of secrets in the game that require you to like push the dash jump to its limit, and if you don't get the like pixel perfect jump, you will not make the jump. For example, when you get the power up to your Mega Buster, which lets you get a 3rd level of charge and lets you charge up the special weapons too, you need to do a pretty precise jump into some breakable bricks, and then make sure you don't fall off, because if you fall off, you basically have to restart the level to do it again.
Also worth noting, I didn't actually do that jump or get it in that way. So you did mention it to me, but I never found anything that was crazy difficult with it.
Yeah, I wouldn't say crazy, like it would take me like 20, 30, tries to jump where I wasn't really at risk of dying. There was that boss during Wily's castle that's like it's like a tank where its head floats up into the sky. There you had to kind of like it took me a while to figure this out, but I had to like dash and then jump like through the middle of it to get to the other side, because if I jumped, landed on it, and then tried to dash jump, its like head would close on me and I'd take damage. So that fight I thought made really good use of the dash
Yeah,
jump.
I'm specifically talking about the stages once again,
Right,
because when we get
okay.
into bosses in a second, and I'll just forewarn you, my opinion's completely flipped on the bosses. Like, I think that the bosses, it's a completely different situation. I just am saying that the process of moving through the levels and killing enemies is not about platforming through these levels, even in the same way that Super Mario World was about platforming through the levels and avoiding spikes and going on platforms with those, black furry enemies that would create hazards for you as you were moving between platforms. It's just not the same. That's not what this game is about. It's about the action and power fantasy of just moving through the levels and using whatever tools you deem necessary to get through them.
I agree with that. And to me, it made me enjoy the game more, honestly. Like, to be honest, didn't really care for the platforming in, Mega Man 2. Like, it's hard, but it's not like fun.
It's not
to
tight in a lot of ways, is
Yeah,
maybe a good way of description.
A, it's not tight, and B, you don't get this like when I play Celeste and I do something really difficult in that game and I chain like 6 dash jumps together and a bunch of resets and like a bunch of, wave dashes and all that fancy stuff. Like when you finally make that series of really hard, tight technical maneuvers, it feels really good. When you like finally, jump from a platform to a platform in Mega Man 2, it doesn't feel fun. It's not cool. It's like the most basic platforming mechanics ever, with
that's
massive punishment.
Man,
It's
that's too
like-
much. I think that the addition of having to shoot enemies and dodge enemy projectiles in Mega Man 2 actually, for me, elevates it above, the precision platforming in Sonic the Hedgehog. I can understand that you didn't like it, and I get what you're saying that's a bit flat, but at least for me, Mega Man 2 was an enjoyable challenge once I got a bit more into it.
Yeah, I guess I just never enjoyed the stages in that game. Like sometimes I liked the bosses. The stages that I did like was stuff like, was it Quickman's stage where you had to drop down where the bars were coming from the side of the screen?
Yeah, that was good. Yeah,
So that stuff's cool. But that's gimmicky, and that's not really. I wouldn't call that platforming.
it's not the core of the experience.
No. Whereas here, it's not. Mega Man X's stages are they're very easy, and I would agree that they're too easy and would probably prefer them to be harder too. But I would prefer it to be like this than it to be like Mega Man 2. Like, the addition of the dash and the wall jump just make it feel so much more enjoyable to me. Like, it's a very fluid game to play. Like,
yeah.
When I was going through it the second time, I was blazing through the stages and I wasn't like not killing enemies. It was more like if I chose the right weapon, the enemy would die really quickly, and if I made precise jumps, I could, skip entire platforms. It felt like I was like, it was the power fantasy I was happy with.
And I agree with you, James. Like, there's no doubt the game feels great to play. It's just that, yeah, it has come at the cost of it being, to me, less engaging difficulty-wise. However, I mean, I've been dissing it for a while. I feel like the bosses are a completely different ballgame. In a lot of ways, to me, it feels like this game was designed around the bosses first and the stages second, because the boss design in this game is fucking fantastic. It is modern. There's a game that came out not too long ago called The Messenger, which is like I guess you'd call it a spiritual successor to Ninja Gaiden, but there's more ranged attacks, so it felt kind of like Mega Man to me. And you could put the bosses from this game into The Messenger and you wouldn't even know the difference. They are excellent. Every boss has like 3 to 4 attacks. Every single one of those attacks are fair. The boss's attacks have synergies with one another and require different strategies to evade or dodge or different damage windows. I love the boss fights in this game. Every single one, even the ones I didn't think were fantastic, were still good. The bosses and the boss fights in this game are great, just at a baseline level. And that doesn't even take into account the upgrades or weapon choices you can make to shift the balance in your favor.
Yeah, I agree. It's so much better than 2. Oh my god.
Yeah.
The only boss I didn't really end up liking was actually the very final boss. I thought it didn't have that many attacks, and honestly, it was just a patience game more than anything. Specifically, its first form was like I found out I figured out a strategy that I was basically he couldn't do damage to me, and I would do 1 damage to him, and I would very slowly kill it. It was not very satisfying, but all the stage bosses are great, I think. Storm Eagle's maybe a bit too easy, and I think that while I do like a lot of the unique interactions that the weapons have with certain bosses, I think there are a couple where the entire boss is just completely trivialized by a special weapon. Specifically, Spark Mandrill is just not a boss fight if you have the freeze, which you will, because it's like the first stage you'll beat, probably. He just gets stun locked to death and doesn't get to attack you.
Well, this is what I was going to get into. Every boss gets stun locked. The Chameleon boss, that Chameleon boss was kicking my ass, and it got to the stage where I was doing a bit of chip damage to him by wall sliding and stuff, and then I'm like, what am I doing? There's going to be a weapon that shoots up. This is Mega Man. This is how it works. I need to find the weapon that shoots up, and then I'm going to find this fight much easier. When I found the weapon that shoots up, which was the boomerang, I just stun locked him. It was literally shoot a boomerang this way, stun lock him to death, fight over. That being said, I don't actually hate this structure, and I actually think it's quite interesting because you can beat every single fight with your regular attack. And I think that one of the cool things is that because the boss fights are so fundamentally fair in terms of being able to evade their attacks, it means that you never feel punished for not having the weapon that's overpowered against them. So I kind of am less mad about the fact that there are weapons that insta-win the fight, because you don't actually need to use them for them to still be engaging and enjoyable boss fights.
I agree for the most part, although the me of a few days ago would have massively disagreed after because the very first boss that I tried to do was Armored Armadillo.
Yeah, that's the exception, right? It doesn't quite that's I would say that boss, you do need the special weapon.
Yeah, so I persevered. I was so stubborn. I had a friend in Discord with me, and I would have tried to fight that for 90 minutes to 2 hours maybe, with just the Mega Buster. And I finally found a strategy where if I wall jumped into the top corner constantly, waited for him to do his spin attack, and then I'd figured out the bounce pattern so I could perfectly dodge it. Then I could if I landed on the ground as he landed, I could get 1 hit on him and it would do 1 tick of health, and then I would have to wait for him to do the spin again. And then after half an hour of that, I got him to 1 HP and then foolishly died, and rage quit the stage. So that was a bit frustrating, but I also had the same experience with the Chameleon boss like you did. But, a few hours ago, I went through it again, and I did just beat him with the Mega Buster this time. I was better at the game, and I was able to dodge the attacks, and he is ultimately a fair fight. So I think all of them are, if you know what you're doing, which is great. And, it probably is a good thing that the weapons have these weird interactions, but I do like the ones that are a bit more subtle. For example, you can use the cutter on the octopus or the mammoth to cut off their tentacles and trunk, which disables 1 attack. And they still have their strong hitting attacks. It doesn't just...
Oh, that's quite cool. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, you have to hit them 3 times with it for it to do it, and then the octopus can't grab you, and the elephant can't spray the sticky stuff onto the conveyor belt.
Ground.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. I much prefer that than freezing,
stun lock, free
yeah,
win,
to
right?
death.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I don't think it's necessary. And in this sense, Mega Man 2 is a little better because your weapon just does more damage as opposed to it being a free fight. But I guess that it's more important for me that the fight is fundamentally fair than there is a way to kind of cheat your way to a victory. Just zooming out for a second, I also think it's interesting. Like, I don't know how you engaged with the structure of this game, James, but like we said earlier, it's open-ended at the beginning. You can do any of these 8 stages in any order you choose. What I would do is that I'd jump in a stage, I'd get through the stage, I'd get to the boss, and if the boss was kicking my ass, like happened with the chameleon stage, I would leave it and do a different stage. And I know we talked about this in our Mega Man 2 episode, but this structure is just excellent. Like, giving the agency to the player to decide, you know what, this is too difficult, maybe I need some more life upgrades before I do this, I can come back later when I'm a bit stronger, is fantastic. And I just really, really love this structure.
And honestly, I think that this structure is enhanced by the stages being quicker and easier, to be honest, because it lets you, like...
That's true.
If you drop out of the stage and you realize you have to slog through this hard stage again to get back to the boss next time, it's a bit of a mood killer, right? I much preferred, because the bosses are the real stars of the show here, so I was kind of glad that I could quickly get through them and then, get to the bosses. And it wasn't like I wasn't having fun during the stage, because the movement just does feel good.
It's a good point, actually. I mean, if you're trying to make it fun to return to stages, having them easier to get through does make it more fun. You do feel more punished having to return to and relearn the more difficult stages. So I'll give you that one, James. Let's go to a music break. How did you feel about the music in this game?
Oh, it's fucking excellent. I love the soundtrack of this game. I think they did a bang-up job on basically every single track in the game. My favorite, personally, was the forest theme. It's very energetic, like it's very high octane. The moment you load into the level, these aren't like build up tracks, they're just straight into it immediately. They timed the beginning of each track perfectly with the start of the stage, and it just gives this really like energetic feel, like heroic feel, I guess, to the character. Especially, he's got that like determined look on his face as he's dashing forward to this high energy music. It's great. They're really ham it up in a lot of ways.
It's bloody superb. Just one of the strongest OSTs we've done. And I mean, I feel bad saying that with ambient droning in the room looking at me with its dopey eyes, but you just cannot deny the strength of this soundtrack. Funnily enough, I was like, yeah, this is pretty good at first, because I think I started with Chill Penguin, Launch Octopus stage. I'm like, yeah, these are pretty good. And then Storm Eagle hit me. I was like, holy shit, here we go. And then I got to the Arm and Armadillo stage. I was like, fuck, this is amazing. Like, it just felt like the order in which I happened to play this game, the music just kept getting better and better and better with every subsequent track. Fantastic. Loved it. The other thing that stood out to me is that I'm a really big fan of the Undertale OST, and I swear to God, this game's soundtrack feels like the primary inspiration for the Undertale OST. I've really struggled to find music that sounds the same as this, and it's this. This is exactly the same. So I was delighted to find something that vibed with Undertales.
It's got a very short loop, but I just really like the stage select music as well. And
it's all great. Like there's like the boss fight music, which is a bit more pensive, and even like something like the password screen has good music. It's absurd.
Like the moment you click, and it's the sound effects too, right? Like you click select on the stage, and it makes that ching sound, and then it plays the like. It does that really hammy, like, electric X in the background, and it loads in the picture of the boss, which then perfectly transitions to the start of, the song. They've done a fantastic job here. I think the soundtrack is excellent. Funnily enough, the Penguins theme is actually one that grew on me doing it a second time.
I don't hate it. I just want to be clear. It's still good, but it just really got to another level when I got to those later tracks. So James, can you please play my piece of music?
Yeah, all right. So we'll play Armored Armadillo. Just imagine, you're careening through this mine on this mine cart, going breakneck speed through hundreds of enemies. It's great. This is Armored Armadillo's theme. Patrick, if you make me say the phrase Armored Armadillo one more time, I think I'm going to go a bit crazy. But
You could just call him the Armadillo. I think the armored bit is redundant at this stage. All right, so I just want to jump into a little point now, if that's okay.
Sure.
Okay, so revelation I had while playing this game, and something that I probably should have realized earlier. It's always kind of irritated me about these classic games, how enemies respawned the moment they were out of your line of sight. You know what I mean? Like, this happened in Castlevania, it happens in Mega Man 2. Like,
Yep.
You move along. It happened in Kirby as well, and it used to really irritate me here. I actually think, upon reflection, and I think it's particularly true in this game, it actually serves a very valuable purpose. If enemies didn't respawn, this game would be even easier than it is, because you would be able to determine your engagement range and kite at will. By at least having enemies respawn, it means that when you're fighting an enemy, you cannot retreat infinitely without having to deal with the enemies coming from the other direction and getting caught in the crossfire. So I just wanted to share this as like a little interesting reflection and observation I've had, how I've had to come round on this mechanic a bit. I think that in parts, it can be very irritating when enemies are coming from the floor or ceiling, because you can be in situations where you can't interact with them. But actually creating a smaller zone of engagement with respawns actually works and actually has a purpose behind it in a lot of the fights in this game.
Yeah, and it didn't actually happen everywhere, I think, because this game doesn't have, screens like Mega Man 2 did. It has very, it scrolls constantly as you're moving up and down, and it's got a smaller viewport. So I tend to agree. Like, it's the kind of thing that's undeniably irritating, like, every single time it happens. But, if it didn't happen, you couldn't grind for items. I still did that a lot in this one. Maybe more so every time I would like accidentally use all of one weapon and then realize I needed it for the boss or something like that.
What did you think of the expanded arsenal in this game? Because Mega Man X has like a big surprise up its sleeve. Maybe it's not a surprise for people who have played this game before, but basically you can either get an upgrade early to upgrade your buster, or you can get it when you get to the first stage of the castle. You basically get the ability to charge every single alternate weapon in the game to have a more powerful version of its attack. So when you get this thing, not only do you have 8 weapons, you have 8 weapons that all have sub-attacks or sub-abilities in some instances. Did you go mad with this like I did and just spent shitloads of time trying all the different attacks and messing around with them?
It's so fun, right? Like,
yeah.
I feel like other games would ration these upgrades out to you, but all of the upgrades in this game are massively impactful on their own, I think.
They're busted in half.
Yeah, like finding that piece of armor that halves the damage you take, forever. It's like, what? You never get upgrades this powerful in games.
Super Metroid did it, actually, but go on.
Did it? I forget that.
Yeah. Super Metroid became a cakewalk towards the end because of how many upgrades you got. You were basically invulnerable. But Mega Man X giving you a one-time 50% upgrade feels more reasonable.
Yeah, well, I kind of like that there's so few, but they're also like fun on their own. Like that one Mega Buster upgrade upgrades all like 9 of your weapons at once. You just get a whole 9 abilities in one go, and you don't know what to do with yourself. It's so great.
Exactly, yeah.
Like it's so fun.
How did you feel when you discovered that you could have 20 seconds of invulnerability? I was like,
that was great. I bypassed all of those sections where you had to climb like vertical walls, and there were those like turrets that would run away from your shots on the side. I just jumped through them forever. It was great.
That was kind of insane. Like when I discovered that, I'm like, why is this in the game? It's just
so
like,
fun.
You can just get through the whole stage by slide dashing. It's amazing.
Yeah. In general, I think that the weapon selection in this game is just like massively better than Mega Man 2's, for example. It's like
agree, yeah.
Every single weapon is like fun and has a use. It's like I felt like the Leaf Shield was like why would I ever use this skill? I felt that way about a couple of items in Mega Man 2.
I really liked the Leaf Shield in Mega Man 2.
Really?
Man, that's so weird. Yeah, there's a couple of sections which having the Leaf Shield makes it much easier. Like, you know, the like where there's a platform slowly moving across the screen?
Yeah.
Like, you just pop on the Leaf Shield while everything's trying to attack you. Yeah, the Leaf Shield is good. I do agree with your point, though. There are a lot of weapons which are just kind of whatever, and that saw blade ends up being stronger than everything else.
Like everything? That's not the case here. I feel like every weapon is powerful in its own right. Like,
what were they thinking with that fucking meat blade, saw blade thing? You could shoot it in any direction, right? You could shoot it diagonally. My God, it's all coming back to me.
Yeah, well, like the weapons in this game have their set limitations, right? Like the boomerang goes, it can go vertically, and it's the only weapon really that can go vertically other than, the homing rockets.
And some of the upgrades. I think the upgraded wind.
Yeah, the upgraded wind goes up. Man, the wind is so strong normally. Like it just decimates big enemies. Like anything that would take a few seconds to kill takes one button to kill with that thing. Like, in the underwater level, though, those like long sea serpents.
Yeah.
It's like 2 wind attacks kills them.
Also use the wind attacks against them.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, I also found that I was using the different weapons tactically, at least until I got the upgrades. Then it was, easier to just kill everything. Like, for example, there were guys with shields. And like a mace that would throw out a chain, and there were a couple of different ways to attack them. But if you shoot the energy ball at their backs, like at the wall behind them, the energy ball would go down and hit them. Or when I was
the
doing
ice for that. Like as if
the ice freezes them if you shoot them from the front, does it?
Well, no, I shoot the wall and then it would bounce off the wall and hit them in the back.
Yeah, I did that as well. The other thing is that when you're platforming up those platforms, I can't remember where, but there are robots that spawn in the air and come towards you. That was homing rocket time. It's like this way I'm not having to do jump attacks while also trying to stay on the platform. I can just shoot these homing rockets, be safe, and make my way up.
Yeah, one thing that I noticed, again, with the electric thing up the wall, I didn't really use that too much on my first playthrough, but doing it again, that tower you climb that has the platforms that, like, they come out of the wall and they have a gun on?
Yeah. One of the hardest sections in the game, honestly.
Yeah. If you use the lightning will go through the platform and hit the turret, and it'll kill it in one hit, which I only just found out. Yeah. With that guy, that boss too, like he's teleporting around, the missiles will still hit him even if he's teleporting, because they're locked onto him, which is great. Boomerang can pick up items, which was very useful for getting heart tanks in difficult places.
Yeah, I read about this afterwards, by the way. I was like, that's how you're meant to get it. Because I was like, what fucking weird kind of slide dash bullshit technique am I meant to do? There's a thing where you can spawn an ice platform that you can, the upgraded ice blast that zooms
find
along.
A use for that one.
And I was like, do I have to somehow use this with like a perfect slide jump bullshit tricky technique? But no. You're just meant to use the boomerang in a lot of those spots.
Yeah, I couldn't find a good use for that ice platform, which I thought was a shame because they're like
It also, it falls off. Like because I tried to use it in a spot and I just fell to my death. I'm like, cool upgrade, man.
Because I was thinking about the things from Mega Man 2, like the hoverboard, and those things were sweet, and there wasn't really an equivalent here, which I was a bit disappointed by.
I just watched Summoning Salt just released, like in the past few days, a video on history of Mega Man 2 world records. And the way they use those items to get through the level is sick. Like, it's made me kind of reassess how I feel about that. I was like, Jesus, I should have been using these items everywhere because they're just massive time skips and ways to dodge enemies all over the place if you abuse those items.
Yeah, well, I used it to dodge, that bit in the fire section with the disappearing blocks. Like, I never did that. I just skipped it.
yeah, me too. I tried for a while. I'm like, fuck this. There must be a better way. This is ridiculous.
The shield was probably maybe the least useful, but it was good.
I didn't use the shield.
It was good against...
Because you have invulnerability.
Yeah, it was good against the octopus boss and the final boss, because it's like the very last form. It's the only special weapon that can damage him other than the normal buster. The chameleon's shotgun thing, so much damage to some enemies, like completely trivialized Storm Eagle for me.
I didn't really like the attack that much, though, to be honest. Like, it did a lot of damage to some enemies, but it didn't feel as satisfying to use as some of the other ones. Personally, my favorite weapon, and I mean, I know it's like kind of ordinary, is just the flamethrower. Because I feel like that
it just has so much
DPS, and in terms of raw DPS, like, I feel like it must be the strongest weapon in the game, and it kind of, the close range of the gun makes it kind
fun.
of more exciting, because you just kind of are like trying to mow through the enemies as fast as you can.
In Armored Armadillo's stage, that bit where you have to chase the big thing, the huge digging machine.
Yes, and you can destroy it.
And you have to kill it really quickly so you can get to the heart tank before it breaks the platform. Yeah, you can kill it in like a second and a half with the fire, whereas everything else takes so long.
Yeah, so I think the flamethrower definitely my favorite. But in general, I just had a lot of fun messing around with the weapons. Once again, it's not a challenge thing. It's not like, oh my god, they're forcing you to use every weapon in the right spot. It's more just like, here's everything, fuck around with it, have fun, and you do have fun. And I did have fun. I think this game, taps into a lot of the vibes I got from Super Mario World.
Yeah. I did have a couple of criticisms, actually, to the bosses. There is a very specific problem I have with the bosses. I think, and maybe I'm wrong, but this is the feeling I got. Tell me if you had a different experience. I think the bosses choose their attack patterns in a purely random way with no extra checks or anything. And what I mean by that is that it's entirely possible for a boss to use the same attack like 30 times in a row if you get unlucky. And this happened to me a couple of times with bosses that had attacks where they went invulnerable, like the octopus's spin whirlwind thing, or the armadillo's bounce, or the boomerang dude's teleport, where they just got stuck doing their invulnerable move for a couple of minutes and I didn't know what to do.
That is bizarre. I never had that. I basically would say it's mostly random, but from my experience it was semi-random. I never had them do an attack for 7 times in a row. It was more varied than that, but maybe I was just on the right side of variance for a lot of these attacks.
Surely the chance of it happening is fairly low. I mean, the bosses generally only have 3 or 4 major attacks.
Yeah, and it's not like when I was fighting as a chameleon, he did the thing where he dropped the spikes 4 times in a row. That never happened. So I think that there must be something more sophisticated than purely random to make them move through attacks. I would say it's mostly random though.
Yeah,
but like I said, maybe I was just on the right side of variance and you were on the wrong side of it.
Yeah, and I've never really thought about this before because it makes so much sense that you would have the boss have some kind of counter where they could only do it and Oh, I mean, even in modern games, like something like Elden Ring, like I feel like you just never see a boss do the same attack twice in a row, like ever.
There is a lot more sophisticated. I mean, Elden Ring has strings as well, so it's like it's particularly complicated with how that game's boss attacks work. Because yeah, they can basically input read to react differently, and they can combo
Yeah.
different parts of it's a whole nother level. But
Yeah.
yeah, certainly I found the bosses fair, and I wouldn't say I experienced this issue, not to take anything away from what you had to deal with.
The second thing, I know maybe this probably makes the game even easier, maybe, but it really annoyed me that if you had a projectile on screen, say for example I shot a rocket and the rocket was traveling, while the rocket is traveling, you cannot switch weapon.
Yeah, it feels bad, but it's also fair because otherwise you could just spam through your 8 weapons for shitloads of damage. It's like I know it feels bad because I had the same thought, but then I'm like, oh, okay, I kind of see what it is. This is the backswing of the attack. I have to use this weapon more deliberately.
I'm not opposed to there being like a backswing or like a small timer, but like that means you can't just like, cycle shoot as fast as you can click. But like in the final boss, I had this situation where, I tried to shoot a rocket at his head, and the rocket's trajectory was such that it didn't, it just kept circling around his face and never hit him. So I was just, I just had to reset the game because I couldn't, the rocket wouldn't hit him and I couldn't change weapon.
I mean, that sounds like a specific kind of weird glitch then.
Yeah, but
did it happen at any other stage with any other weapon?
There was definitely stages where I shot and then it was like a 2-second delay before I could switch weapon, and it feels bad.
I just can't get behind this. This is just with the way the game is designed, it can't have you switching weapons when you still have another attack in the air.
I disagree. I think that
you just cycle through your 8 attacks and just kill everything though.
Would you though?
Yeah.
Because if you have a rocket, you can only shoot the rocket so many times a second, right? Why would that not apply to the other weapons as well? I don't see how me being able to swap, and then after that second delay shoot is overpowered.
Because a few of the weapons have delays, right? So you shoot the chameleon blast, then you shoot 2 rockets, then you shoot to the flamethrower, and all of a sudden you've done a zillion damage in a shorter window when they actually all go off, right?
Well, I think what you do is if I shoot the chameleon shot, then the chameleon shot has a fixed second backswing. Even if I swap weapon, I still have to wait that duration.
Okay, sure. I mean, I guess that has an effective thing. The other thing you could do is just have the attack disappear if you swap weapons, but I think that feels even worse. Basically, I just, and I'm not, obviously when it's glitching out and the rocket's not hitting and you have to restart the game, that's shitty. But in general, I just accepted this as as a way to stop you just chaining through all your weapons quickly. And I really didn't have a problem with it. It feels bad, yes, because we're used to having more fluid weapon switching, particularly in the modern retro FPS space. If you look at Doom Eternal, the whole design of that game is just swapping between weapons quickly, and a lot of the modern retro FPSs have followed in that way. But it just means that you have to be a bit more deliberate, and I was okay with it.
Yeah, it annoyed me every couple minutes, basically. I really hated it. The second thing is, I think there's a delay between your shooting and when you can dash that I think is slightly too long.
Yes, I agree with that.
I think that I don't think you should be able to shoot and then dash immediately after each other, because then, you could do some real funky shit. But I think it's slightly too long, and a bunch of times I would shoot and then, get hit because I thought I could dash, but I couldn't.
Yeah, and I think it's worth pointing out that these things feel so egregious because everything else feels so smooth.
Yep. Agreed.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with that second example. Can I ask you, James? This may be once again my phobia of controllers coming out, but I was doing okay on a controller with this game at first, but I eventually had to swap to keyboard for my sanity. My problem on the controller is that so it's X2, it was X2 attack, A to jump, and B to slide. And my problem was I couldn't simultaneously charge my weapon by holding down X and then jump and slide all with the thumb in a comfortable pattern.
Yeah, I would have bound shoot to a trigger instantly.
Okay, yeah, but I found it like super awkward with the way.
Yeah,
but maybe I'm just an idiot with how when I was just copying the SNES controller layout basically.
Yeah, I think that's terrible. You want at least one of the buttons on the shoulder patterns.
Okay.
Funnily enough, I actually played the whole game on keyboard.
Yeah.
And regret it like horribly. I found because I had slide on Z, X to jump, and C to shoot, and then I used the arrow keys, and then I had like S and D as my weapon swaps. Man, it was so uncomfortable to swap weapons while trying to like jump and stuff. Like if I just had the like L1 and R1 as weapon swaps, that would have been so much easier. Or like L2, R2, and then
that's what I had. I had L1, R1 as weapon swaps, and definitely that was pretty easy and fluid to do. It's just the whole slide plus jump plus charge that I couldn't get my head around. So
I would bind X to jump, like R1 to shoot, and then like circle to slide. And even then, you can double tap left and right to dash as well. So
I did not know that.
Yeah,
I always slid.
Yeah, you can. It works with either a button or you can double tap, which is great. And I used both.
It's also there's this thing. It's kind of like secret. Well, it was secret for me. I didn't realize it at first. There's a wall leap you can do, like if you press jump and dash off at the same time or jumping off a wall, you will go fucking flying across the screen.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, that trivializes the boss fights even further because your movement is insane. Like, did you know about that at first? Because it never tells you. I don't know if it's ever necessary to actually get through a stage.
There's no explicit tutorials in the entire game, right? Like, the whole first level is a tutorial that teaches you by forcing you to, like...
But you're never put in a situation where you have to wall dash to proceed. Definitely there's some health
There's some heart
you
tanks you need to do it for, yeah. I definitely used long jump all the time, like... dash and then jump, and that felt great. And a couple bosses were definitely designed with that in mind. I think the dog and the tank. I really liked the tank fight, by the way. I thought it was great.
It's very clever. My favorite bit about the dog fight is that I realized it was more about not moving than it was about moving.
Yeah, me too.
Because at first you're kind of like you go into like dodge mode and you're jumping around and you just keep getting hit, and then you're like, and then once you learn its patterns, you realize you can stay still a lot of the time and it's just going to fly right over your head. It's quite cool.
Elden Ring, honestly, like a lot of the boss patterns in that game feel like they're designed to trick you, and I felt that way about some of the patterns in this game too, whereas like once you figured out, like, because they like predict where you're going to move almost. I felt that way about Sigma Phase 1. I felt that way about the dog. I felt that way about, I think, the chameleon. It's like if sometimes it felt like the boss was reading my mind.
I really struggle with the spider fight. Like, I think I figured it out eventually, which is that it always follows. If it can follow a crossbeam, it will follow it.
It will follow it? Yeah.
But yeah, it took me ages to get that. That's a puzzle boss fight you can get on board with, is it, James?
Yeah, that is a puzzle fight. Yeah, because it's like, and it gets faster near the end, so you have to like react to it faster.
And the window to do damage is like really small. Yeah, and you have to almost preempt it, like be firing as it lands. And because its speed varies as the fight goes on, you can't just memorize a rope pattern. You need to react to the speed it's going.
Yeah.
But so it was very satisfying for me to finally beat that. That's when I got to that fight, I was getting killed, and I actually went back and did some exploration and got like 4 more health tanks, and then I was like, all right, I'm ready to move on.
Yeah, I did a bunch of exploration before I started that section because I remembered I had PTSD flashbacks from Megaman 2.
From that dragon, my god.
Yeah, Castle much better than Mega Man 2's. Like, I hated the Castle in 2, and I
Yeah,
was like,
the castle. I don't know. So I did want to talk about this. It kind of just like you just fight the 8 bosses again, and
Yep.
Mega Man 2 does this too. Really not a fan.
Yep.
I don't know. I don't know what it adds to the
I
experience.
thought the
Like,
new bosses were great.
agreed. Yeah, it felt like they did this big long thing for the sake of it, but once again, there was no platforming really. And I think that one of the good things about that final stage was the platforming. Anyway, I didn't really love the final stage. New bosses were great. I actually liked all of them, even that one that, you know, the lightsaber phase, I guess, was interesting, figuring out how to beat it. I really liked the final boss as well. It reminded me a bit of that boss fight in
Ace.
yes,
Yeah, the
you
last
got
boss.
it immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah, where you have to go off on the platform. Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. I was like, man, this is just exactly the same. It's not, but it's close enough where it's more about learning the patterns and learning to dodge than it is actually doing damage, because you will kill him eventually. Good boss fights. Really, really enjoyed them.
Did you get this weird feeling, like when you were looking at the very last boss, that its like body plate kind of looked like Majora's Mask?
I haven't played Majora's Mask.
It looks like it. If it looks like the mask, it's like
Why
even got
why
the
do we
same
play
color
shitty
scheme.
games when we could be playing Majora's Mask, James? When
Well,
are we going to play that?
That is like the guys talking about video games too much game, right? Like,
Let's skip Ocarina of Time. People won't be mad.
yeah, no, not at all. I want to talk about this. I'm actually kind of fundamentally opposed to the idea of the castle section in general. It was my least favorite part of Mega Man 2, and probably this game too. Like, to me, it's like they throw away the cool non-linear structure in favor of these, like, you know, boring to bullshit levels. I would just rather there just be the boss fight, right, after you beat the stages. Add more stages that have interweaving things, and then just have a boss. I don't really get any value design-wise out of, you know, a linear stage that doesn't really, I don't know, test.
The problem is what it should be is it should be the final gauntlet. It should be hard. It should be illicit. It just should be. And I know that that's not consistent with what the rest of the game is doing, but that's where this kind of final thing makes sense. It's like, okay, you've got all the toys, you've got all the upgrades. We're going to put you to your limits now. You have to use everything you've learned. But it's not. It's just kind of more of the same in terms of difficulty, with some good bosses in between. But as a holistic thing, in terms of how long it takes to get through it, with the rehashing of you fighting the same 8 bosses again in between, I agree with you. It is the worst part of the game. And I just think that they need to... You can have a gauntlet at the end, but it actually needs to be a gauntlet, not filler content.
See, what I'm saying is I disagree. I just don't want there to be a gauntlet of any kind, basically, because the thing I like about these games is this, like, non-linear exploration thing where you're trying to figure out what order to do things in and, like, what neat interactions you can find between weapons. These gauntlets just don't have any of that at all. So, like,
that's not a very triumphant conclusion to the game, though. If you just beat the 8th boss and the game ends, or do you want it to just go straight to the boss fight?
Yeah, just go straight to the boss fight. Like, have the final battle for sure.
Well, I guess
I don't want to waste my time on something that's not what I like about the game. I guess.
Yeah, and I feel like part of the reason you feel that way is that the boss fights are the best part of this game by far, but if the other parts of the game were more fun, it would be more fun to have more parts of the game like that, right? Maybe not, but
no,
for me at least, okay.
No, it's not about difficulty. It's about non-linear exploration and trial and error. Like, it's linear. I don't want a linear section in this game, basically, is what I'm saying.
To me, I'm not opposed to the concept of a final gauntlet in principle. I would just say it's pretty poorly done here, but I'm not intrinsically opposed to it.
Yeah, I guess the best way I can describe this is I did my second playthrough today, and it took me like an hour to beat all the stages, and then I unlocked the last gauntlet and was like, you know what, I'm just not going to keep playing Maybe I'll even play this again, but I just don't think I'll ever do that last bit again, to be honest.
Yeah, and that's fair enough. Like I'm not disagreeing that it's bad. I'm just saying that it's a problem of execution for me.
I'm pretty much near the end of my notes on this one. We could maybe do one more music break.
I'll allow you to pick some music, James. It's a great OST. It deserves 2 tracks on the show.
Yeah, all right. Well, what's his name?
Armored Armadillo.
We already did Armored Armadillo.
Just do it again.
Just do it again. No, we're gonna do Sting Chameleon because this is my favorite track. It's like so high energy. And by far my favorite track in the game. I thought that the other best one probably was
Storm Eagle.
Storm Eagles, yeah, it definitely was. But this is an absolute banger. So this is Sting Chameleon. Man, what a track that was. It almost feels like cheating to put a music break so close to us wrapping up, but, really good soundtrack, so I'm happy to play more. Patrick, give us your final impressions on Mega Man X.
I recommend Mega Man X. I had a lot of fun with it. It feels fantastic. Like I said, the slide is one of the best bits of platforming movement I've ever experienced. I think that the genius of making it cancelable and conserve momentum is what makes it feel so good to use. And I think it feels just as good as Celeste Dash and certainly better than the Dash in Hollow Knight. I think that the weakest part of this game is a consequence of its design philosophy, which is that it wanted to be a fun playground of cool new weapons for you to use against enemies, with a tight design around the boss fights. This has led to the regular platforming bits as you move through the levels to be kind of uninteresting on a baseline level. They're very, very easy to get through. There's very little in the way of true platforming. There is a little bit, but there's nothing that even gets close to approaching the dedicated challenge that I feel Mega Man 2's regular rooms do on a case-by-case basis, which to me ended up being the most fun part of the game. But overall, the fact that the boss fights are so damn good, the fact that controlling your character feels so damn good, and the fact that it really pushes the envelope on giving you this incredible arsenal to kind of have fun with means that, yeah, this is a great game. I think you could say that it is probably better than Mega Man 2, but they're trying to offer very different experiences, and I think that I would prefer to go back to Mega Man 2 as like a game to learn and perfect. But if you're trying to jump into a game and just have fun with an old platformer, then Mega Man X knocks it out of the park. It's a good game, you should play it. I just think it's important to acknowledge that with what they're going for, it fails to deliver a challenging experience. And that won't be important for a lot of people, but it might be important for some.
Personally, I did occur to me a few times that the game was a bit easier during the gameplay, but man, I was just having too much fun to really give a shit, to be honest. I massively enjoyed my time with this game compared to Mega Man 2. I think that they've done a bang-up job on basically every aspect, and I have only really little gripes here and there, like the random, AI that it happened to me, but not to Patrick, and some, very minor nitpicks about the controls. But man, overall, this is a very tight package. This game is very well designed. All of the enemies are designed for the player. The weapons are all extremely fun. The stages are creative, if a bit easy. I really enjoyed this game. I think the music is fan-fucking-tastic. It's pretty hard for me to find, any real meaningful fault with this one. I would honestly, if you've never played Mega Man before and you just want to give one a go, I definitely recommend starting with this one. It's a
great agree time. With that.
Yeah. And it doesn't take too long, right? Like, this is a short game that you can complete in a couple of hours, and then, you want to play again a couple of days later, trying new routes, beating bosses with different weapons, maybe with no weapons at all even. You can really, make this game, harder or easier depending on the route you choose, which I think is great. And it's just a really great complete package, full of a lot of charm, and, it really hams it up with this Mega Man action hero thing it's got going for it. So I think Mega Man X is an absolutely fantastic game and would wholeheartedly recommend it to anyone.
Yeah, it's a good game. Like, there's no doubting it. And now that we've played we've played a Battle Network game, we've played the OG series, and now we've played one of the X games. We have to do a Zero game next, I think, James. Those are the ones which are more Metroidvania-like.
Yeah, because because we called this a sub-series, right? Whereas Zero's like an actual spin-off of X, right? Because Zero's the character.
I don't fucking know, man.
It's too hard.
I don't know. It's too confusing. There are too many. But yeah, I know that it's the other big franchise, the fourth one. I can't believe there are 4. It's nuts.
It's kind of weird because, like, as a kid, I only played Battle Network and had like zero exposure to the older Mega Man titles, and like. It's like when I saw Zero, it was like, that's where Proto Man's design comes from. It's like
I saw that, these games, the Mega Man X games, were on PC as well. Because I was like, oh really? My god, there's a PC version. Why didn't we play that? And then I looked up the footage of it. And I'm like, oh, that's why we didn't play it. It looks like dog shit. Like it's very laggy FPS wise. It looks really bad. I'm really glad we played the version we did, because the PC version is not very good.
Right, okay. Man, we didn't even get to talk about the cool robot sections.
The cool robot sections, what?
The vehicle.
Oh, when you're in the mech kind of suit, there you go. Actually, I do really like that you keep your dash when you're in the mech suit. That makes it much more fun to use.
And your momentum, like if you dash jump with it and then jump out of the cockpit, you go flying. It's great.
Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, vehicles are great when they're optional and terrible when they're not.
And short,
and overpowered. Like
what do you mean? The vehicle sections in Half-Life 2 are optional, right?
Oh. Yeah, like optional is in playing the whole game's optional because of them. Yeah, that's my opinion.
Thank you so much, everyone, for listening to us talk about Mega Man X. We are the Retrospectives podcast. My name is Patrick Arthur, and my co-host was James Turlings. You can find all of our content on our website, which is rspodcast.net. It's got links to all of our social media stuff, every single one of the 95 episodes we've made, as well as a bunch of articles that James and I have written. The most important link, of course, is our Discord server. We would love if you would come by and join our Discord server. That's where we take listener requests. It's where most of our community is concentrated. And we would love for you to drop by, join, tell us what you think, make a suggestion, or just come by and chill and lurk like about half of our Discord users currently do.
We got a bunch of new users the last week. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, we're glad to have them there. At least one person enjoyed our terrible time in Splinter Cell, James. So I guess I have you to thank you for at least producing some entertainment from our misery.
I'm very glad I forgot that we could say it's just so good.
Yeah, so please drop on by, come say hi. It'll be a lot of fun. James, you haven't told me what we're playing next fortnight. I'm on the edge of my seat.
Well, that's because I haven't decided yet.
All right, we're going to do this live on air. Resident Evil 4?
How far through Fallout Tactics are you, Patrick?
Not very. It's okay. I've renegotiated with Chris. He's also not very far through it either. But yes, we should probably, be spending more time playing Fallout Tactics. You may be starting to get an idea of how enjoyable the game is with how slowly James and I are making our way through it.
It's actually quite funny because I think I'm having more fun with it than I was with Fallout 1 and 2, but that's not to say it's a lot of fun because I didn't really enjoy those games, but it is more, and I think I'm coming round to it weirdly enough, but I am not playing in turn-based mode, which I think is a big part of that.
It is a long game. That's what I'll say.
Yeah.
So Jace, what are we doing?
Do you want a longer or a short game?
I think short game is probably ideal, unfortunately.
Okay,
so
well that's easy. Because we actually had a short game recommendation a couple weeks ago. Drill Dozer for the Game Boy Advance. It's about 4 or 5 hours long, I believe, and it's kind of weird because it's this game that I always saw in shops as a kid and always saw the art and kind of brushed it off as not looking that interesting. But after the recommendation, I went back and I read some reviews on this game, and man, people think it's the best game on the Game Boy Advance. So I'm actually kind of excited because I love those. I love that console. And I've basically liked every game on it that I've played, so really looking forward to it. It looks to be like a puzzle platformer type game where you're in a little mech suit and have some, drill-related platforming abilities. So
I can't believe we're doing 2 platformers in a row. You are going to get so many stealth games, mate. Someone recommended a short stealth game. We're fucking doing that. Get ready for an onslaught of stealth games.
It's not
6
you
in a
don't
row.
like platformers.
Yeah, they're alright. I do prefer the 2D platformers to the 3D ones, and from what I saw, it does look kind of interesting. I like the feel. The drill has weight. When you drill into something, you kind of almost pop out of the ground from the impact of the drill hitting the platform.
Yes.
So it does seem like, and this is just from watching it, not even playing. So it seems like it's got that tactile feel to give it, which is very important for platforms.
Apparently, you have to play this game with Rumble enabled on a controller. You just have to.
Okay.
Because apparently, one of the mechanics of the drill is that you use the shoulder buttons to spin it in different directions, and depending on different directions you're spinning, if you have a threaded track, you'll go forward or back, stuff like that. Yeah, so interested to see how this one plays out.
Yeah, I'm not opposed to it. I'll allow it, James. All right, that about wraps it up. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to us, and we will see you next fortnight.
See you then.